In his memoir, Prince Harry promised us he would tell us not about the prince he was born, but as a man he has become. And what is the title of this book? This magnificent book that is telling us about the changed Harry who is excited about his new life in California. Why? It's called Spare. Because he is the spare royal. And apparently, Harry the man is very vindictive, spiteful, angry, and bitter that he was born the spare. And he was not given the due he thought he deserved within the royal family. And on his way out, he is going to burn it to the ground the best he can. And this autobiography is basically a nuclear weapon he is lodging at his family, his country, his culture, his heritage, all for the sake of Meghan's ambitions and the almighty dollar. Hello everyone, welcome to Royal News Network. My name is Brittany and today we are talking about the new tidbits we've gotten about Harry's explosive memoir entitled Spare. And I truly believe that this book will be probably the death knell for Harry and Meghan in many ways. I feel like again they will share way too much. And this book I feel like will irreparably damage Harry's relationship with his family. And we've gotten some details I think confirm that. In addition, I feel like from the public side, this was looking more and more like an incredibly terrible move. Because when you think of the spare, what that all kind of evokes in us is the sense that Harry doesn't like being the spare. I mean, who does? You want to be the heir, right? It's good to be queen. That's what I read in a book once. It is good to be queen. However, in this day and age, with all the opportunities and the massive popularity that Harry had at one point, I feel like this book is a giant, basically middle finger to the rest of the world going, you did not treat me right. I am a victim of my birth order. I mean, aren't we all victims of our birth order, whether we have multiple siblings, 0 siblings, 1 sibling, 2 siblings, 3 siblings? We are all a victim of our birth. However, at the same time, people use that to their advantage, whereas Harry basically is just drowning in this misery, this self-created misery, that he is the spare and that he was not treated the same as his brother. And I feel like his jealousy is coming out now. And I feel like this book will be just a monument to Harry and how just petty he is, vindictive, mad, spiteful, so many things. And it will truly, I feel like, sink Harry and Meghan for the future. This was a massive miscalculation. And I'm going to explain to you a bit why I think that and a bit more about the details that we have of this book. But if you guys haven't been here to Royal News Network before, I love royals, I really do, and I like talking about them. So this channel is, I provide compelling commentary and analysis on the latest kind of royal news and gossip. I'm a historian, so I'll also talk a bit about history and television shows and movies, do a review on those as well. So if you love royals, I would love to have you subscribe. In addition, I also have a channel devoted especially to royal fashion. So if you love fashion and you love royals and you love tiaras and jewelry, that is a channel for you as well. So I will put a link in the description box down below if you'd like to visit that. I would absolutely love to have you there. We have a review this week of the latest fashion looks coming up. In addition, I will also have a Tiara Tuesday every Tuesday where I look at a tiara from one of the royal households, whether ruling or not ruling, and share a bit about its history. But back to Harry. And this book, guys, we have more details and it's not pretty. It looks pretty bad. It looks bad. And again, like I said in my intro, I feel like this will be a mistake, like not seeing his grandmother and his grandfather before their deaths, when he could have, especially with his grandmother, seen her right before she died. Literally the day before she died, he could have seen her if he and Meghan had made the trip up to Scotland while they were there. This book will be one he regrets forever. Because I feel like it magnifies, it puts a giant label on Harry's head. I am bitter that I am the spare. I am mad that nobody took me as seriously as my brother. Why didn't you guys give me everything I wanted? Because I am a prince and I am as important as the future king. Can you not see that? I am as brilliant and as smart and as capable as William is. And to a certain extent, hey, that might be the case. But Harry's missing something very critical here, is that all of us, to a certain extent, We all have particular things we cannot change in life. And there is a prayer that says, it's called the Serenity Prayer, which tells us, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think it's become clear that Harry does not abide by that prayer, which basically says, hey, there are things in life you cannot change. I was the firstborn. I can't change that. I can't change that at all. My family, my dad was adopted. There were actually 3 other siblings adopted out after they were born. And he has, in addition to 5 children his biological mother helped raise. He cannot help that. None of us can help certain circumstances in our life. It's how we deal with them. It's how we manage them. It's about how we overcome adversity, overcome our lots in life that make us, I feel like, powerful and make us people that I want to emulate. I want to emulate people who took a difficult situation in life and did not complain about it, but actually either overcame it, learned how to adjust their life, and tried to make other people's lives better because of the adversity they went through. Those are the people I want to follow. I don't want to follow someone that goes, well, I was second born. I mean, that is terrible, isn't it? Like, well, Harry, you know what? There's been thousands, if not tens of thousands of royals just like you. And some of them got along just fine being the spare. But before I go on, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the histories of spares, because I feel like that's kind of important here. I feel like Harry feels like he's the only one who has not been respected. Even though, again, many spares have come before Harry. But let's delve into a bit of what we've learned about this book. According to the publisher, like we heard yesterday from the New York Times, it will be published on January 10th globally. It will be published in 16 languages, and there will be an audio version narrated by Harry. I found that kind of funny when I first heard it, because I remember from their trailer for the one Archetypes audio trailer that they did, Harry and Meghan, for a show that they may or may not have actually been trying to do together that either never finished. For some reason, it never came together. Either way, Meghan made a joke about Harry's voice being, it sounds so much better when you say it in the accent. So I feel like she encouraged him, like, we need your accent there. So it'll be interesting to see how he reads it. That'll be kind of fascinating. It's 416 or 17 pages. And apparently it is already half price in the UK at Waterstone, I believe it is. So I found that kind of interesting, is that they're already slashing the price in the UK, knowing that it'll be a bit of a slog to get some people to buy this book. Because I think what the publisher will find, whereas while Harry and Meghan, I feel like, create a lot of noise, they don't actually create a lot of action. So what that means is, yes, Meghan wears something, but it doesn't sell out. Or Harry and Meghan, they make a big kerfluffle about being in a particular event. But is that event's getting publicity? Sure, but is that translating into the kind of marketing attention they really want? Is it actually converting into dollars? I don't feel like that's necessarily happening a ton. So this book will be very interesting to see how well it actually does. Now, Harry and Meghan claim that most of the proceeds from this book will be given to charity. I question some of that. I don't entirely buy that, but hey, what can I do? I'm just a commentator here on YouTube, guys. Unless somebody gives me an insight. So hey, if there's an insight in the publishing industry who knows a thing or two, feel free to hit me up in my email. I'd love to hear from you. But back to this book. So beyond everything, it makes sense for it to be published in multiple languages. That's why it's taken a while. But we've also gotten some additional reports, especially with the languages. And here's, according to the Telegraph, what some of this title of spare, which I guess apparently is more of an English term, will be translated into in some other languages. In the shadows, leftover, reserve. That tells you everything about how Harry thinks of himself. He thinks of himself as leftovers, in the shadow, unreserved, and just not at the forefront as he thinks he should be. But again, he is the spare. So let's unpack this a bit. Every royal family has spares. That's just life. That's been life for centuries, guys. Nothing about that has changed. Harry thinks he's special, but really he's come from a long line of spares. And some of them have been actually brought up to the throne, and some of them have not. It all depends on how things go. I think particularly what the most interesting case of a spare is actually King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII, guys, he was a spare. He was not going to be king. In fact, he was actually kind of ignored by his parents for a bit and kind of kept away from his older brother because, hey, Prince Henry, he's just a spare. We don't really need to think about this. He's just going to be his spare self over there. But all of a sudden, his brother Arthur dies. And all of a sudden, King Henry VIII is king. And that was a huge moment because King Henry VIII, I feel like, has changed so much of Britain, especially when it comes to moving them more in a Protestant direction. And obviously, I feel like he's the most famous monarch probably in British history besides perhaps Queen Elizabeth. It's Henry VIII. Everybody always thinks about Henry VIII, mostly because he beheaded his wives that he disagreed with. And what's interesting too is because Henry was the spare, his older brother had married Catherine of Aragon. And I always say Aragorn, which is Lord of the Rings. Aragon married Catherine of Aragon. So that's probably wrong too, but I'm trying to get through this because it's later in the evening and I need to get this finished. So he married Catherine, and what happened was because he died so quickly after they got married, when King Henry he married a Catherine, they obviously had Mary. Yeah, married and had Mary. Yes. And then when it became to divorce proceedings, what Henry tried to argue is that Catherine did consummate her relationship with Arthur, which was a question. Did they consummate their relationship? Because they were quite young at the time. So his argument was that, well, they consummated their marriage, ergo I should not have married my wife, and I need a divorce so I can marry Anne Boleyn. Well, the Catholic Church didn't quite go along with that. Part of that was that Catherine's brother was very close with the Pope, I believe it was. And one of her siblings was, because she had quite a few siblings, and they were kind of in different places. I feel like one was the Prince of Naples or something. Forgive me, I don't quite remember. One of her siblings was advocating on her behalf when it came to these divorce proceedings. So it never went to effect. That's why Henry said, you know what, I'm done with the Catholic Church. I want to marry Anne. And of course he didn't end up beheading her, but he did get Elizabeth out of it. And she was one of the greatest monarchs in British history. But that is an interesting case of the spare. But there have been many spares who were not going to be king. We have King Richard III, who did actually kill the king and the spare, his young nephews. So there has always been this thing where the spare role is kind of complicated. And some of them have actually been aggressive enough to kill whoever the heir was, or the heir perhaps died, or they were hoping they would get the heir in a position to die. One of the things I found really interesting about Louis XIV, who became king as a child, is that his younger brother, the Duke of Orleans, Philippe, he actually had a proclivity for men. And so the court actually encouraged that proclivity because they thought, well, hey, if he's busy with his dalliances over here, Louis can be protected over there. So there has always been very much this conundrum of what do you do as the spare? We also see this with Andrew. Andrew, I feel like, has very much struggled with the spare, but he did also have this interesting dynamic, whereas that he was 10 years younger than his older brother. And he was also Her Majesty's favorite. So he got a lot of this favoritism. So he had a bit of this arrogance to him that was indulged by his mother. But then you also have Anne, who was the spare for about 10 years before Andrew came along, and Edward, and she was pushed further down the line. And she's been a fantastic example of what a spare could be. Because yes, being the spare is hard, it's difficult, especially I feel like in this modern age. But if you find a role in a life outside it, then you are able, I feel like, to build something really fantastic. But that does take an independence. It does take a growth. And I feel like the British monarchy is different in that they did want Harry and Meghan to work. They weren't immediately going to kick Harry and Meghan out. Although they did offer Meghan the opportunity, apparently, to continue working as an actress. Because I feel like even initially they knew that this Harry and Meghan thing probably wouldn't last very long. She would get bored pretty quickly, they realized. I don't feel like they knew how difficult she could be, or particular. They didn't know how particular she could be, to use Meghan's term, which is just synonymous for difficult and demanding. That they just didn't know this about her. So there was these additional challenges that were built in as Harry and Meghan grew. But I feel like once Meghan came into the picture, Harry's complex about being the spare, which again, there's been so many people throughout history who have been in that role, that she kind of fed off all of his brokenness around this, all of his hurt and pain surrounding this, in addition to the pain surrounding his mother's death. And so this wound that had started festering at we don't know what time, Meghan just kept picking at it and magnifying it. That's my personal opinion. But she kept picking and magnifying this. So all of a sudden this spare role that he was always destined to play, and he is stuck in that role as much as William is stuck in the role being the heir. All of a sudden it's been exploded into this vindictive, petty, bitter, angry man who is going to try to do everything he can to make sure that he levels as much as the monarchy as humanly possible. And basically, this is his revenge plot. That's what this is. Now, he can't actually stab anybody in the back like they used to back in the day, but he is willing to metaphorically stab them in the back because that is his way. In his mind, he's going to get ahead. But unfortunately, I feel like the pain he's going to inflict is going to damage relationships that he's had all his life and that he will never now recover. Because apparently what we have also learned is that although there's been reports that Harry was kind of desperately trying to edit, apparently that was not actually the case. Reports that the Duke has made significant edits to the tone of the book after getting quote-unquote cold feet are said to be overblown. The Telegraph understands the book will in fact contain a short note explaining that it was written before the death of his grandmother, the Queen, on September 8th, but will otherwise appear intact. So this could be, again, very damaging to the royal family. And for what reason? They cannot change that Harry was the spare. They cannot change that William is the heir. And throughout history, the monarchy, any monarchy, although they protect whoever is the king and the heirs, the direct heirs, it's basically there to protect the institution itself, because the members change, but the institution itself will remain the same. And Harry is trying to, I feel like, destroy that as much as he can by damaging his father, his brother, and perhaps even his sister-in-law, his niece, his nephews and niece, all for the sake of, again, what? What is his aim here? Because he can't change. Does he think he's going to parachute in as a king? Or like Dan Wootton says, is he really just trying to destroy the monarchy because he want to make Harry and Meghan king and queen? Which again is not how any of this works. And I do understand that. I feel like Harry was very frustrated that him and Meghan were forced to take a back seat. But here's the thing, that would have always been the case. Harry had this fantastic role in the Invictus Games, and all he had to do was choose to work within that. But he decided not to. He wanted to be on the same level as Catherine, William, and his father. But that was just never, ever going to happen. And I do feel like Meghan had this delusion that because Catherine was a duchess, Camilla was a duchess, and she was a duchess, the ergo, well, they're all equal. And she had this perception in her mind as well that, well, I'm better than everyone. I'm smarter than everyone here. I'm smarter than anyone in this room. So she felt like she was entitled to basically be treated as like Catherine, like Camilla, like the Queen. But again, that's not how this works. If a monarchy was equal, it wouldn't function. Because it can function. Somebody has to be at the top. And there has to be people underneath them. That's how they all work. They all work. Not saying that anybody as an individual human life is not valued. But within a monarchy system, it's the king, queen, whoever, next in line after that, next in line, next in line, next in line. And that is how it goes. Because Harry is not even the spare anymore. George is. George is the spare. Charlotte is actually technically more of the spare now because George is the heir apparent. So now Charlotte is technically the spare. So is Harry jealous of children? Yes, it appears so that this uncle is frustrated that these kids, these children who again have no power to determine their own birth, are ahead of him in the line of succession. Those are things those kids cannot change. And that Harry is apparently jealous of this somehow is, I feel like, targeting them through this is just goes to show, ugh, what a terrible uncle he is. Honestly, I mean, we don't even have that much evidence that Harry spent really any time with his nephews or niece. We don't really have any evidence of that, honestly. We've seen pictures of Catherine and William hanging out with Zara Phillips, with Autumn Phillips and her children through Peter Phillips, and Peter Phillips has been there sometimes since they've divorced and stuff. They're not together anymore, but we've seen the Waleses with other members of the family and their children, and they've been playing and they've been having fun. So Harry comes across here as, and we don't have much evidence that Harry and Meghan spent any time with those kids. Meghan was at an event, a polo event where William's children were there, and she was holding Archie, granted, but she basically ignored Louis when he was trying to smile at her. She kind of seemed to ignore him. And that's difficult, again, from the length of the lens and everything. It's difficult to know if she actually saw him or not. But Meghan clearly didn't interact at all with those kids. So I feel like this spare label that Harry's putting on his book tells us that in his mind, he is very, very frustrated and angry that he is the spare, that he is not as important as children. Let that sink in for a second. We also have heard that the tone of the book appears to have changed significantly since it was first announced in July 2021, when it was billed as an inspiring, courageous, and uplifting human story. Now it is said to be a remarkable, moving, personal journey from trauma to healing, ending with the eternal power of love over grief. What that tells me as well is, again, because we've heard Meghan use this language a lot, talking about their love story, this grand love story. Everybody wants to hear about their love story. And I feel like Harry and Meghan are very much, in their minds, their love story is, especially I feel like in Meghan's mind, she's more in love with the idea of what their love story is, or in her mind, what she believes it is, rather than actually being in love with Harry or their marriage, really. That's what I feel like when I hear that. Once again, it comes to that thing where it's love. Everybody loves love. This is about a love story. But is it really? Because, you know, the love of your family should factor in there somewhere, but it's definitely not. So I feel sorry for the royals because they really did try to do as much as they could. I mean, the Invictus Games was a huge success. Harry could have kept doing that for years. And he was even more popular than the Queen at one point. But he made the decision that he wanted to torpedo everything in order to appease his wife. And writing this book, was this the best idea? I really don't think it was. The book is expected to take aim at members of the royal family as well as the institution as a whole, detailing the upbringing Prince Harry has already characterized as traumatic. The title was said by one royal source to be very pointed and particularly hurtful to family members who had tried to help the prince avoid the spare role while he was a working royal. Imagine if he'd published this with the Queen still here. And said another. Members of the royal family and their aides have not seen the manuscript, and they have not been given the opportunity to respond to any claims through their lawyers. They are understood to have been notified that a press release about the book was being issued shortly before it was sent Thursday morning, only after publication date was leaked by the New York Times. A source familiar with the book, which was completed months ago, said it had not undergone drastic changes, despite rumors the Duke wanted to tone down the more damaging elements after the death of his grandmother. This book is not a takedown or tell-all. It's a story about his truth, and that hasn't changed. Well, unfortunately, that actually has changed. I feel like Harry is rewriting his history the same way Meghan is. Meghan rewrites her history. They could not agree on some of the key elements of their story in the Oprah Winfrey interview. So how are we supposed to believe that this is his story, his truth? Because their truth is malleable. It changes as they need it to change. They add details that they don't really need to add. So looking at all this, I feel like this is something where Harry and Meghan, I feel like, are immensely damaging themselves, because once you have it on paper, if something comes out and it's proven not to be true, then on paper, You are a liar. When it's on video, I feel like it's a bit harder because people can say, oh, well, you forgot something or you spoke wrong. Those sorts of things are more malleable. Although Harry and Meghan's inconsistencies in their stories are something you could drive a Mack truck through. They're very, very different. But when it comes to something on paper, if the palace can prove something that Harry said was wrong, that's a problem. That's a big old problem for him and Meghan because they have it all down on paper. You can go back and you go, well, this is wrong, that's wrong, this is incorrect, this was taken out of context, all these sorts of things. And I feel like it gives the palace a manual to really kind of go after Harry and Meghan in a way that they have not before. Harry and Meghan have very much been treated with kid gloves. They just didn't appreciate any of that. And they've been treated with dignity and respect in a lot of ways. The palace hasn't gotten into the mudslinging that Harry and Meghan have. Harry and Meghan have tried to drag them into that multiple times, and the palace has stayed above it. Well, now Harry and Meghan may create something where the palace has to respond. But again, I don't feel like it puts Harry and Meghan in a great light at all. Setting the tone for future readers, a spokesman for Penguin Random House said, Spare takes readers immediately back to one of the most searing images of the 20th century. Two boys, two princes, walking behind their mother's coffin as the world watched in sorrow and horror. As Diana, Princess of Wales, was laid to rest, billions wondered what the princes must be thinking and feeling, and how their lives would play out from that point on. For Harry, this is his story at last, with its raw and flinching honesty. Spare is a landmark publication, full of insight, revelation, self-examination, and hard-won wisdom about the eternal power of love over grief. And I want to say, I don't buy that at all. What this tells me at the end of it here is that these publishers, whether or not Harry knows it or not, are exploiting Harry for money. They're exploiting his grief, his trauma. And I have no doubt the demise of Charles and Diana's relationship was traumatic. But do you know what the person who really experienced, I feel like, the most trauma from that is William. William was there shoving tissues under his mother's door. He witnessed, I think, a lot more than Harry could ever appreciate witnessing. And I feel like William has a much better grasp on the demise of his parents' marriage than Harry does. But Harry is going to exploit not only his own grief, but his brother's. He's going to exploit his father. He's going to exploit his stepmother, his sister-in-law, his nephews and niece. All for the sake of money, all for the sake of fulfilling the desires of his publisher. And I think that is pathetic. I think that is weak. And I think it shows Harry's true character. That he, at the end of the day, despite all the privileges given to him, despite all the love shown to him by the public and affection, he is incredibly ungrateful. He is spiteful towards his brother and his nephews and niece for simply being ahead of him in the line of succession. He should be there. He should be ahead of them. He is bitter that he didn't get and Meghan did not get the grand vision, all the perks that they thought they deserved, even though he knew he was the spare. And that's not to denounce him in any way. That's just to say that his role would diminish over time. That is how it works. Catherine and William, even, when it comes to them and their children, Catherine and William, as they get older, the spotlight will go from them to their children. That's how this works. Their children will take up more and more of the limelight. That's how all this works. Even as an actress, Meghan should know that. At some point, you are the hot young thing. Well, then something else comes up who's the hot young thing. And you know what? You just kind of go down the line. It's how you deal with that I feel like really informs us about who you are. I mean, take a look at Madonna. Have you seen Madonna? She looks interesting. She looks interesting. And you can tell that all these young women are coming up and taking her place, basically, that she's trying desperately. She's taking these very explicit and provocative photographs. She's filtered herself to death to try to compete. But you know what? The mark, I feel like, of a mature person is to roll with the punches and come out stronger. Look at Dolly Parton, look at Cher, and then compare them to Madonna. And tell me who's doing better, really, at the end of the day. Well, I would say it's Cher and Dolly Parton. I feel like Madonna is consumed by the fact that she is no longer the young thing. And I feel like Harry, that is his vendetta, is that he is not the prince everybody's clamoring for anymore. But he only has himself to blame for that, because when did the public perception shift? When did everything shift for Harry? It's not because he was the spare. It has nothing to do with that. It was because of Meghan. It was because of Meghan. And I feel like how she took his wounds and just broke them open and magnified them to the extent of where he did develop all these complexes about things. And he tells us, well, I'm in therapy, I'm in coaching now, I'm better than I ever was. And I'm like, you don't seem it. You really, really don't. Nobody's really buying it, because we see William and Catherine and they seem stable. Their family seems stable. And they don't have to go on these petty vindictive binges at their family in order to feel like they're getting ahead. Because William, he could be incredibly vindictive towards his father. He saw, I feel like, the demise of Charles and Diana's marriage firsthand, much more than Harry ever did. And William has made the mature decision to forgive his father, forgive Camilla, and find healing and find hope in a situation that some people could drown in. That is what William decided to do, and he is healthier for it, he is happier for it, and I feel like he chose a woman who helped him through his issues in some ways. I feel like William and Catherine make each other better, whereas Harry and Meghan make each other worse. Harry's popularity and Meghan's popularity is already in the toilet. I feel like it'll hit rock bottom, and I don't know if it'll ever recover. I don't know, depending on what Harry puts in that book, he may not go to the coronation. He may not see his children have titles. He may see his own title stripped. He may be stripped of everything, pretty much except for, well, he still is Prince Harry, that's how he was born, but he may not have Duke of Sussex. Meghan may not have Duchess of Sussex. They may be told, hey, Meghan can't even use Princess Harry. She is just Meghan Markle. We cannot permit her to use any sort of title anymore. Your children, I'm sorry, are just Archie and Lilibet. They can come and visit, but yeah, they don't have those titles anymore. And Harry and Meghan, they only have themselves to blame. Harry wants to blame everybody else for his issues. He is the victim of the world, of his mother's death, of his father's infidelity. Apparently not his mother's infidelity, but his father's, and all. Camilla is this awful person, and all these sorts of things. And he just comes across as this man who is not growing. He is recessing. He is becoming this just incredibly angry, bitter man. So this book will not be the grand revelation I don't feel like Harry thinks it will be. I feel like he's been sold a pack of lies, and these lies are all coming to roost, and Harry now is dealing with the consequences of his own decisions, and I feel like he may regret the day he met Meghan Markle and that she convinced him this was the best path to take, because I don't think he would have done this 5 years ago. I really don't think so. I think she wound him up, played on every insecurity he had in order to make herself as profitable as she could possibly be in Hollywood. And the victims here are the royal family, Harry and Meghan's own children, and very much to a certain extent Harry himself, because he has been led to believe that this will get him ahead. This will help him. This will tell the world his story, and people will understand. They will finally appreciate Harry and the misery he's gone through. Well, Harry, there's people who starve to death every day. There's people who die of preventable diseases. There are people who die in accidents and in murder and all these sorts of things. There are people who are suffering much more than you. And I'm sorry, but I don't want to hear a privileged prince living in a $15 million mansion complaining about his life. And I don't think a lot of other people will want to either. And I think, honestly, this will be perhaps the worst thing Harry has ever done. And there's no going back. There is no going back. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think. Are you planning on reading the book? I will ask for a copy from the publisher, but I will not be buying the book. If I have to, worst comes to worst, I will rent it from the library, because I don't want to give Harry money, because I don't know where that money is going. So guys, again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.